And without further ado, I will hand it over to Maaike, who will be taking over the first section of the live stream.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Louis. All right, so I hope you can all see my my screen right now. Let me check.
All good.
All right, perfect. So thank you, Lee. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I hope everyone is safe and healthy during these times. Thanks for joining us today. Alejandra and I are really excited to be sharing some insights about accessible design, as well as tips and tricks about how to incorporate this into your products. I will kick off the presentation for today. Just a little bit about me. My name is Maaike Dokter. I am from the Netherlands, where I now live in a small village. I work at Xablu, the cross-platform company. And as a UX designer, I'm specialized in healthcare projects, and my function at Xablu is Director of Healthcare. I am also the chief cheerleader for Xablu Contracts, which is a new platform we are developing internally for creating and managing contracts in blockchain. And that is super exciting. What is really interesting about being involved in both Xablu and Xablu Contracts is that we are building Xablu Contracts from the ground up. So there was no branding, a style guide, or designs that we needed to be aware of. And the projects I work on at Xablu are usually for external clients, which means there is an existing design or brand of the company in place. They're both very different experiences when trying to implement accessible design. Through the EIT Digital Master School, I specialized in accessible and adaptive design in Madrid in Spain. And before I joined the specialization, I was very unaware of what accessible design was, what kind of impact it has, and how we could incorporate it. And since this was part of the computer science program, I learned a lot about how to incorporate accessible design in user experiences, interface designs, as well as technical implementation in code. And in the past years, I've been able to gather more practical experiences in the work field. So I am really honored and really stoked to share some of these experiences with all of you today. As a UX designer, I work closely with UI designers, and we usually work in Figma. And generally, I find that my colleagues are really keen on incorporating accessible design. So the intention is there, but there is the question of how to do this properly. And I find that the key here is knowledge, because when you know what accessible design means, what kind of impact it has, and mostly if you really learn how to incorporate it, it becomes so much easier to do. So today I will provide a short introduction on the why and how, as well as share some practical Figma plugins to help you incorporate accessible design. So let's start with what is accessible design. Accessible design is to make sure that everyone can interact with your design, no matter their disability or rather functional diversity. So there's a common misconception about accessible design. And that misconception is that accessible design means directly focusing on a specific user group with a specific functional diversity, and that they are the only ones who will benefit. And if you are taking anything away from our talks today, I hope you will take away that accessible design means you design for everyone and everyone benefits. And this can be best shown in examples where their creators were motivated to create something for a specific user group that in the end benefits us all every single day. Fintan Cerf, who had a hearing impairment himself, had a wife who was deaf. And he developed host living protocols for ARPANET. And in the end, he was able to communicate with his wife through the computer using text. And this invention has, over time, developed into the email we all know and use today. In 1968, Jim Thatcher created the first screen reader at IBM. And it was not trademarked at the time, since it was really created for staff members at IBM who had visual impairments. This invention of text-to-speech we now use in many devices, screen readers are still commonly used, but we also use it for innovations such as navigation devices telling us where to drive, without which I will probably never get anywhere. Another example is of Apple, who has implemented many accessibility features in their phones. And if you have an iPhone, check out what the different features are, because you can definitely use those in user testing as well. And as it turns out, some of these features are just really handy. For example, the iPhone's flashlight can blink its light if you're being called. And this was designed for people who are hard of hearing and might not hear their phone ringing. But I actually use this feature every single day because I cannot for the life of me find my iPhone in my handbag. So now whenever my phone rings, the flashlight helps me to find my phone in time to answer. And these examples of innovations inspired by accessible design demonstrate that it really is beneficial to so many people. And the same is absolutely true for our web designs and user interfaces. To colorblind people, certain levels of contrast are not visible. And to someone with perfect vision, certain levels of contrast can be very hard to read. For someone with epilepsy, rapid moving flashes can trigger seizures. But for someone who can process many stimuli, flashes can be perceived as extremely annoying. So what accessible design really means is that you create more user-friendly designs. It also accommodates for situational functional diversity. So for example, someone can break their arm, meaning they can only operate the device with one hand. Someone can have their phone in the sunlight, causing a glare, making the screen difficult to read. I could lose or break my computer mouse, meaning I need to do everything with the keyboard. We can sometimes forget that we are not able to use all of our senses or all our body to interact with the products all the time. I truly believe as a person working on the product, we have the responsibility to make sure that everyone is able to use it. So then comes the question, how do we do this? How can we incorporate accessible design? So fortunately, there's an international recognized standard that can help us here. The World Wide Web Consortium is an international community where member organizations, full-time staff, and the public work together to develop web standards. And this community has also created an accessibility standard for the web summarized in WCAG 2.1. This standard is specifically designed for web interfaces, be it on a desktop or mobile device, but it can also be applied to user interfaces in general. And as stated, it is an international standard recognized by businesses and governments all over the world. And in some countries, there are even laws that specific success criteria need to be implemented, so all users are able to interact with it. So even beside the intrinsic motivation that we should have, in some cases, there are also laws that require us to include accessible design. I would love to go over all of the success criteria, but that would make this an extremely long live stream. So instead, I will briefly explain how you can read these guidelines and then demonstrate some practical examples. So the guidelines in WCAG 2.1 are divided into 3 levels of accessibility, namely level A, level AA, and level AAA. And these levels are dependent on the effort it takes to implement them, as well as how much impact they have. So level A, for example, is the lowest level, which means they are either easy to implement or they could have a really high level of impact. And the guidelines in this category are really essential and should always be implemented. Level AA then builds forth on level A, and in a perfect world, level AAA guidelines should of course be implemented as well. But these guidelines can be more difficult to implement, or they could have less impact. So the standard consists of success criteria, and most success criteria are also accompanied by advisory techniques on how to implement them, and you can check when the success criteria fails. There are success criteria that are very specific towards the technical implementation in code or towards the design. However, we need to think about how users work with our designs. We need to test user scenarios, and we work as a team to deliver the best products we can. So we as designers, developers, product leads, team members, we need to be aware of what these success criteria are. So I really recommend you to read these guidelines, and you can find the link at the bottom of this slide. This is not necessarily an easy thing to do, but as I stated, key here is knowledge. And when you know what you need to implement for accessible design, it becomes a lot easier to implement it. Today, I will highlight some success criteria we use a lot within our own projects, and also how we test some of these criteria using plugins in Figma. So the first criterion that we will look at today is 1.4.3 contrast minimum level AA. And the text here is directly copied from the standard. And as you can see, it states minimum. There is an additional success criterion for enhanced contrast, which is part of the AAA level guidelines. The minimum contrast guidelines are highly recommended to use, so we will focus on this particular one today. So essentially it states that small text should have a contrast ratio of 4.5 to 1 with its background. And if the text is large scale, the ratio should be at least 3 to 1. And this excludes text that is part of a decoration and does not contain any significant information, and logos or brands names as well. So how do you actually determine this ratio? So fortunately, there is a Figma plugin. And actually, there are multiple Figma plugins that you can use. So here we actually see my slides. And we will highlight this slide here. So for Xablu contracts, we are creating a design from scratch. And we actually use the plugin contracts from Alex Carr. And you can download and install the plugin through the Figma website, which is super easy. So if we look at this slide, we see the text on the top is light blue. So let's check if this actually has a high enough contrast ratio. So what you do is you select the item, you right click, you select the plugin here in the list, and you select contrast. And it opens actually a separate panel, and here you can see whether it passes or whether it fails. So for normal text here, we see that it would fail for both AA and AAA. So now if we actually change the color of this text, so we can make it equal to the button here, for example, you can already see that it now passes for a AA. It still does not pass for AAA, but you can see that the ratio actually has increased by 1.2. So this is kind of how you can play around with it. For Xablu and Xablu contracts, we usually use this color as an accent color, so we can easily use it for larger text, such as headers, which does pass for AAA. And I will also use this darker shade for the rest of the slides, of course. So for people who can see colors very clearly, the difference between the shades can be difficult to understand. Because a slightly darker shade of blue, how much impact does that really have? So to understand this better, I've actually created a separate slide, a test slide, and we will use the plugin Colorblind by Sam Maison de Caires. And here we can also see the different contrast ratios. So for example, white on purple has a quite high contrast ratio, and white on orange has a relatively low contrast ratio. And this was the color blue we had before, and this is the color blue that we have now. So now if actually you select the complete slide and you right click again, you go to the plugins list and you select Colorblind, it opens up another panel again. And here you see 8 types of color blindness. So you can, for example, select a specific one that you want to test. But for now, we'll just open them all just to see how it works. So now if we go through the slides here, you can see how much impact color contrast can have. So for example, here between red and green and orange, it's almost not distinguishable anymore. And the higher the contrast, the better it is visible. And that is especially true when we go to the very last slide, which shows total color blindness. And here you can see, for example, this was the purple text. So it's much more readable than the white on the previous orange text. And here you can really see the impact that color contrast can have. So yeah, the higher the contrast, the better it is visible. And contrast is really not only important for color blindness. For example, if you're standing in the sun, low contrast will not be visible, no matter how good your vision is. So therefore, this plugin is a really great one to use to see what your application might look like to some people in different circumstances. So another success criterion is 2.4.3, which is focus order, which is a level A requirement. And this requirement is important for people who interact with your product using a keyboard, or an assistive product that simulates a keyboard. For example, if a web page is accessible, you can use your tab key to switch between functional elements, use your enter key to submit a form, and use your arrows to navigate through a list, for example. So it is important that you define the sequence that makes sense for a user experience. So it makes, for example, no sense to jump from the far left item on your screen to the far right item and then return to a left item. You wouldn't normally do that if you would interact with a web page. So you also need to define a normal sequence for users who use a keyboard. And also assistive products actually need to know what the elements are. So that can sound a little bit vague, but becomes clearer if we take a look at another success criterion, namely 4.1.2, name role value. So when we develop designs in code, we sometimes create our own elements, such as buttons, text fields, lists, and the list goes on. If we use normal HTML elements, the name, role, and value are actually predetermined. However, if we create our own elements, for example, for a specific design, this element will have no role. So in the code, a button might be identified as a div element, and an assistive product cannot recognize this, so the user will not be able to interact. And therefore, we can specifically set the role, such as button, and properties and values, such as enabled or disabled. So I understand that this sounds like something that developers should do, but I believe we make the design, we need to identify the focus order as well as what the elements are and should do. And fortunately, there is a plugin for this called Focus Orderer by Microsoft, which you can see here below. So to demonstrate, I created an example form. So normally when you go to a form, then this will be the very first item that you would select to fill in. So right now we can actually select the element, right click on it, go to plugins, and here we see Focus Orderer. And when we select it, another panel appears. So right now we can say we want to add this element, and we can see it here. We can go and set the role. So this is actually a text box. Let me see right here. And save. So now we've actually created our first element in the focus order, and we've set it to text box, so an assistive product can recognize that a user can enter text here. So the next item in this form will be the checkbox. So we can again select the checkbox, we can add it, we can go here and set the role as checkbox. That's actually one that you can select. And here, since the checkbox is pre-filled, so it's checked already, we can actually say that it's checked. And this way, an assistive product can also recognize that the item has been checked and communicate this to the user. So of course, the developer still has to program this, but using this plugin, we can already provide the right information to the developer. And then, for example, the button will be number 3. So then here we can say, we select the item, we can add it, we can set the role as a button, and it's not any of these properties, so we can leave it like it is. And now we've created a focus order for the 3 items here in the slide. So we only started using this plugin a little while ago. I do truly believe that sharing this responsibility between designers and developers is the way that it should be. So we think about the elements and developers code it the way that we have designed it. And I was really amazed to learn that this plugin existed. I think that it may surprise you how many websites do not actually pass this criterion. So I actually want to challenge you to open a random website and try to navigate through it using just your keyboard and try to use all functionality and not get stuck. So there's actually also a lot of success criteria that there's not yet plugins for, but especially here, knowledge is key. So know what you can and cannot do. And one of these criteria is 1.4.1, use of color, which is a level A requirement. And this criterion means that using colors cannot be the only way of conveying information. So is your color usage purely decoration? No problem. Do you use color to actually mean something? Then it needs to be accompanied by text or another visual element. So this sounds very logical, but it's actually not always met. So for example, if we take another look at the form that we created, if a user enters incorrect information and they submit the form, an error message is returned. But this cannot be just a color indicating which field is incorrect. Because if you cannot see color, or you cannot see red well, for example, you will not see this. And also contrast here is a really big issue. So a user could get seriously stuck here. And we can actually easily fix this by providing an error message, adding an icon, for example, to the field, or even adding an asterisk to all the items that are incorrect. And the same criterion applies to a situation where you use the colors red and green to indicate if something is wrong or correct. So this example, for example, it doesn't work. You can use icons in combination with the red and green. That is, for example, a way to go. And why is this so important? So again, we can actually check this using the colorblind plugin. So I created a example slide here where we actually have the red and green and the icons. And now if we actually select the colorblind plugin again from the list. So protanopia is when you cannot see the difference between red and green. So we'll select that one. And achromatopsia means you cannot see any color. So if we create these two views, and just to note, images are not actually identified within the plugin. So you really have to only look at the items you created in Figma itself. But here, for example, if you cannot see the difference between red and green, it's impossible to see which item is incorrect if you do not use any form of icons. And here is the same. If you do not see any of the colors, it's impossible to see. And so I hope this demonstrates that including accessible design does not actually always mean that it requires a lot of effort, for example, but you do need to think about it. So knowledge here is really key. And just one more success criterion that I quickly want to highlight is 1.4.5 images of text. So this criterion states that you should use plain text instead of images of text. And users can actually customize this to meet their needs. So if the image of a text is customizable, that's fine, that's perfect, but that's usually not the case. So just to show you, this is actually really easy to do. So for example, here we have two equal images that state the same information, but here the text is part of the image. And here the text is actually an additional element on top of the background. And it seems small, but it's really important because the text box is what accessible design and assistive technologies they can recognize. So this can actually be communicated to a user. And also this really demonstrates that including accessible design does not always require a lot of effort, but you do need to understand that this actually makes a huge difference. And to some people, otherwise they cannot even find the information here. So again, knowledge here and understanding this is absolutely key. So unfortunately, there is no holy grail for creating a perfect user-friendly and accessible design. And as we all know, everyone is different with their own functional diversity, but also everyone has their preferences and find things appealing or not. And not everyone will enjoy your designs equally or find it equally user-friendly, even if we incorporate all the guidelines that we have. But by incorporating these guidelines, we are bringing our designs to a much wider public and we accommodate for many more user scenarios. I know today we focus on designing for everyone, and I truly believe that that is the core message that we want to get across. However, I do also want to highlight one more thought, also demonstrated in this quote. As designers of systems, we have a unique opportunity because by doing our best to incorporate these accessibility guidelines, by just putting that little bit more effort into it, we can actually make a huge impact in people's lives. Increasing the contrast ratio of text just a little bit might make the difference in a user being able to see the text or not. By consciously creating a focus order, we are allowing everyone to interact with the system, no matter if they use a keyboard, voice recognition, or any other assistive product they use to interact with our design. For us, it can be giving it just a little bit more attention, but for a user, it could mean so much more. I hope today you will see that including accessibility guidelines does not necessarily mean it requires a lot of your effort or a lot of your time, but it does require some extra attention. So know what makes a difference, understand what accessible design means, and you will automatically take these guidelines into account when you are creating a new design. Don't underestimate the impact your design can have. Let's work together to create a truly accessible future for everyone. Thank you. So Alejandra has a perfect example of how she pays extra attention to a specific user group to create a more accessible, but also a more user-friendly product.
Alejandra, you're currently on mute. Just wanted to let you know.
Sorry. Please let me know when you already see my screen.
Perfect.
Thank you very much, Maaike, for this introduction, and it was super interesting. All of these tools, I'm gonna go through them in a little bit different way. So first of all, thanks for your time and for having me here, Figma, Luis. And I will give you some tips and tricks to design for seniors. First, a little bit about myself. So my name is Alejandra. I am Mexican, but I am based at the moment in Warsaw. I am from Utilo. So Utilo is a design-based studio based in Warsaw, Poland. We are a team of problem solvers, strategists, visual thinkers who guide growing businesses to human-centered design through research, workshops, UX, UI, and testing. Our clients want to understand their users' needs to create products that add real value to people's life. So that's why accessibility is so important for us in all our projects. Just quickly think what we are going to go through. So first we will see who is a senior, what are their challenges, some UI tips and tricks, some UX tips and tricks as well, and some examples of cool design for everyone. And well, here it's a little personal note. It's a terrible photo of myself, but this is me. It's not the important person in this photo, but is the beautiful lady in the right. She's my grandma. And of course, she's elderly and who are the biggest growing population. But few modern solutions are really providing design that adapts or tackles specific needs for seniors. So making these designs inaccessible and alienating big part of the population who could benefit greatly from this modern technology. I've seen my grandma struggling, making a call. Now she has improved. Now I see her face and not the ceiling when I talk to her. But you know, she has people who guide them, and not everybody is that fortunate. So first of all, who is a senior? When I said talk about senior, you might think somebody with cotton hair, wearing a cane, using a cane, sorry. But in reality, according to Nielsen Norman Research Group, anybody who is 65 years old above is already considered a senior. So here I put the example of Denzel Washington. He is already 65 years old. He's in the top of his career. He's super talented, and but he might already have some physical problems like visual impairments or hearing that we might not know. So this is just to give you an idea that it is not only this idea of the vulnerable old person, but also for our parents. And so, yeah. And here as a graph from where are we going? It is projected that by 2050, the population of elderly people will double. So as designers, I mean, it's an opportunity and challenge, because that means that the products that we are designing right now, or that we will be designing, have to accommodate this big chunk of the population. And just as a curious fact, in 2019, 73% of elderly were connected to internet, according to the Pew Research Institute. I think now with the current times, with COVID, probably this number will be much, much higher. So this cartoonist, Javi Arroyo, puts it better than me. Maybe this is in the left, grandpa in March 2020, and maybe now the grandpa in November. So, okay, what's up with seniors and tech? The relationship has been rocky. A lot of them, even though they're online, we have to wonder how many of them had an actually pleasant experience while being there. How many of them got into frauds because, you know, these dodgy emails they receive. So there are like some physical challenges and mental. These are the ones that we will be focusing today, because I believe that focusing on those two will help in the social and the financial wellness for elderly. Okay, so one of the biggest physical challenge is vision. So here is like a really fancy word, presbyopia, which means that we will have more problems reading up close and smaller type. Like when we grow older, we will suffer some kind of degenerative eyesight, and it's normal. Some people more severe than others, but we have to prepare our designs for this. So these are some like an example of how an elderly could see the same image, like from normal vision to cataract, age-related molecular degeneration, or glaucoma. So a lot of the websites currently are designed by designers with good eyesight for people with similar eyesight, which it is completely, well, not really relevant or true. So we have to consider all these problems so that we give better solutions. Okay, so the first thing we have to look into is color. So Maaike already talked about the color contrast and about color blindness. We also have to consider this. Here is again an example of some icons, how different visual impairments could be looked in different icons. So for example, if you're short-sighted, how would you see it? If you have proton color blindness, or if you have a very severe achromatopsia color blindness. Sorry, these are like complicated names. So we have to be very careful about our contrast. Maaike again already spoke about this, but sometimes we designers want to make it look so sleek and so like, oh, refined, but does it really work? If you don't have a high contrast and if you cannot really read it, then your design doesn't work. So be mindful about that. When choosing your colors, okay, try to choose your primary and secondary colors very distinct from each other so that there's no confusion. According to some studies, they said that when we age, we get worse at distinguishing some shades of blue. So you might want to stay away from important information from blue, for example, and choose also the other variations of your main colors for the states of your buttons. It's important to give color cues, but you cannot only rely on them. So here is some tool that I use. This is from material design. This is called color tool. So this helps you to put a palette and to see how it will work in an interface. It's nice and all, but the part that is interesting to me is this tab of accessibility. So here you can see how the colors perform. So for example, if it will be legible with white text, with black text, what is the minimum opacity? Yeah, so this is a very useful tool. I use it quite often to test, but we also have to follow the guides from Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So I use this tool that is called Accessible Brand Colors. And here it's interesting because they give you the background versus text, and they show you the compliance level. So you can already see if the colors that you choose are accessible or not. And if they are not, you might want to rethink your color schemes. So don't rely only on color to convey a message. So this is similar example as Maaike was providing. In here, we are not sure where is the error if I would be completely colorblind. And for example, in the right side, you have more cues or where is the mistake or what is needed from me. So for elderly, this is super important because also they are new to these kind of forms, not completely new. Digital literacy is increasing year by year, but you know, we have to help with little tool tips here and there. And which leads me to the next topic. So the icons. So icons must provide clarity. We can understand images way faster than text sometimes. And it should enhance the user experience, not confuse it. So in here we will, while designing for elderly, we are going to use them kind of to repeat the message that we have. Like double message. So again, we also have to, so let's start by the shape. I suggest you to make very distinct shapes so that even if you cannot look at them like really sharp, you can still distinguish what the icon is about. And there is this dilemma. Should we do outlined or filled? Well, let's imagine that we have some visual impairment and we cannot really see properly. So what would be your opinion? Which one is more visible? Of course, here you have to consider size and contrast. So I don't have like an answer like, oh, you should go with this or that. I do feel my recommendation would be to go to filled ones, but outlined is not out of the question completely. You will just have to make sure that the strokes are clear enough, thick enough, and that they work also in small size. And don't rely on the memory of your users. So you have to aim for recognition rather than recall. Seniors might not be familiar with abstract icons and language in apps. So this is a little bit like seniors and cultural. For example, in India, in Amazon, they were wondering why they are not using the search bar. And there was the icon with the search magnifying glass. And when they researched, they found out that actually people thought that it was a ping pong paddle. So that means not everybody knows what the icon might mean. So icons should be labeled. And here, yeah, it's just, it kind of doubles the message. So in here, photo gallery, you have like the description of the icon, back, next. Maybe for you, it's very obvious that the right arrow is next in the flow, but maybe for a senior, it's not so obvious. And try in an interface for seniors, try to keep the back button and the home button very on site. That gives them a sense of safety, that they can go back and forth without getting lost. And typography. So, of course, typography is a quite important element in our designs. And according to Nielsen Norman Group, readability has been remained the issue for seniors throughout all the studies over the years. They have an amazing study that they have conducted for all. This is the third edition already, and this is a consistent thing that appears. Seniors complain that they cannot read what there is in websites or in apps. So size and style matter. So here we have some serif, sans serif, and again, blurring them, it gives you like a good idea which one is more readable. Is it the small one, the calligraphic? So I think it depends also in the weight of your typography, in the kerning, leading, but for seniors specifically, the bigger the better. And how to choose a legible typography. These are just some kind of steps you can go through just to see if a typography will be useful for the whole design. So if your baseline, like the descenders and the ascenders, are more far from the X height or the baseline, it will be more accessible because the characters will be more distinguishable from each other. So for example, if you would have a G with very short, like this hoop in the bottom, sorry, I missed that word in English, it might be confused with a Q. And if it's longer, then it might be more legible. And I think this test, I find it the most useful, is a character comparison. So here you have different lowercase, uppercase, numerals, and you can compare characters that might be confused with each other. So for example, a G with a Q, a P with an N, a D with an O. In the numbers, the 0, if it has this like line or not, that can be accused if your typography is accessible or not. So in this one particularly, this is Inter, we might have some problems with numerals because as you can see, for example, 3 and 8 are quite similar, the 6 and 8. So if you are designing a package for medicine, you really have to check these numerals, for example, that they are not confused with an O for dosages. Another tool is blocking for legibility. I learned this in university, one of my typography teachers. So the principle is that if you block half of your word and you can still read it, then that means that it is a good typography. If not, well, try to search for an alternative. And somebody was asking about what is like a big text. So usually like we use a base body text 16, but when you're designing for elderly and you aim to for like a larger text, you might consider going even like 18 points or even 20 like as your base. I'm not saying like this 20 as a subtitle, but like, you know, with different weights. So that could be your baseline. And then from there you start assigning your headers and your introduction text and from bigger starting point. So for example, to this senior, they gave him the choice to adjust the text as he would like to have it. And that was his preferred size in the Kindle, 36 points. And opposite is an iPhone with 12 points, that was like the given standard size. So you can see, of course, every senior has different eyesight needs, but if it's possible to let them adjust the text, that would be better. So just some extra tips: let people adjust the text size themselves. If you are providing video or audio, you need subtitles, and test your product using screen readers. Another physical problem that we face is a motor problem, motor control. So generally, elderly prefer touch screens rather than a keyboard or a mouse. It feels more intuitive. So you might want to focus on touch interfaces. And also, fun fact, elderly are the biggest user of tablets. And in here is really important, the tapping areas, minimum tapping areas. So Nielsen Group says, okay, the tip of your finger is 37 pixels. Apple Human Interface says, okay, depending on this, your minimum tapping area has to be 44 pixels, minimum. And Material Design Guidelines, 48 dps. So dps depends on the size of the screen. But this would be somebody who has no motor problems. So I would suggest you to go even bigger. For example, in here, if you have two buttons next to each other, and if they're like the target areas are so small, you might make some mistakes. They call it the fat finger error. So also your interfaces have to be forgiving, that you would not do this like, oh, I pressed this by mistake. So make them bigger and also keep the distance a little bit further from each other so that they're not these sort of mistakes. And about the gestures, when designing for elderly, it's better to keep the gestures simple, particularly for those over the age of 70. So forget about the complex gestures that require more than 2 fingers. So make your product respond to tapping and clicking only, and don't put key activities behind special movements. So here's like an example of things that we have seen already. The icon, you have a distinctive icon, you have the description, the spacing between elements is longer, is greater, and there are like larger tapping areas. Another part that gets affected when we grow old is memory. And yeah, so procedural memory, how to do things, is generally unaffected, but short-term memory and prospective memory, so remembering to do something in the future, they get affected. So that will affect in how we are designing the flows. And yeah, one good thing we have is that in our favor when designing for elderly is that they excel in attention span, and they are thorough. They will read the whole website. Generally, like, younger people tend to skim through the content, but older people will be really reading step by step. So that means we can deep dive like more content or like heavier content with them. So the processes have to be sequential, so step-by-step approach and a slower pace. So try to avoid dividing users' attentions between multiple tasks or parts of the screen. Avoid multi-layer processes. Make it simple and easy to go back to previous actions if needed. So, for example, here we have also progressive disclosure that tells the user, okay, how much I have left, so that it doesn't create some sort of anxiety. But also you can go back and forth easily. And at the end of this whole process, you get a feedback like, okay, you succeeded. So this is really good practice when designing for elderly. Give feedback to long processes. timings, because they are so thorough with their reading. So you have to be more patient, let's say. So if the interaction is time sensitive, give more time and allow greater time intervals in interactions. So server timeouts, inactivity warnings. And you can also provide reminders about habitual actions, but just be careful not to get annoying. And onboarding screens, these are crucial when designing for seniors. Maybe the younger users might skip the onboarding, but for seniors, it gives them a sense of understanding and also of like, okay, I'm being taken care of. So explain step by step. And lastly, about UX, introduction of features. So don't go from this kind of UI to this, like all of a sudden. When designing for seniors, you have to introduce features gradually over time to prevent cognitive overload. So be careful when you are altering frequently used flows. Update your product wisely. So don't change everything at once, because it will make it harder for seniors. They will have to literally start learning it from scratch. And pay attention to text and to help text and tooltips. And yeah, take care of altering frequently used flows. And just to finish, I will just show you some cool designs for everyone. So these are not precisely digital products, but it gives an inspiration that not everything that is designed for elderly has to be so sanitized. It doesn't have to be, you know, honestly speaking, a lot of the things designed for elderly is quite ugly. So we have to do a better job at that. They are improving, but there's still a lot of place to grow. So actually, one of the quotes from interviews was that current solutions feel like having one foot in the grave, which is horrible if you think about it. So why not having beautiful designs when you are also an older person, but also useful? So here's some inspiration. This is Elena Tamburinis. She's a student she was a student in Italy, and she created these objects that encourage affection in all age. So for example, this walker for people who like to dance, or this scooter for life. It was in the Design Museum in an exhibition called Design for Our Future Selves. Or for example, the social and autonomous robotic health assistant. So these are just like very little examples of the possibilities of things that we can do. And if it fits, oh, sorry. And this is about Polish grandmas, babcias. So they cook and they sell like their recipes, and it's a really nice project. So yeah, I just want to say thank you and an invitation to get more involved in accessibility, especially for elderly, because if we design having elderly in mind, we are designing for more groups than just them. And if it suits them, it will suit us. So don't be selfish and design for more people. So thank you very much. And this is it from me.
Amazing presentations. I'm just going to flick over to some questions that have come in. Thank you both so much. So first question, I'm going to go over to Maaike, and there's a question coming about plugins and whether it's possible that some plugins may not be 100% accurate when detecting accessible guidelines, and what would your approach be to get around that problem? Is there something you can diagnose? What's your advice? You're on mute, sorry.
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Beginner's mistake. No, that's a great question. So indeed, the plugin it provides, so the contrast ratio. So this is done, well, it's basically a mathematical plugin. So it just really looks at the different color codes and then looks at what is the ratio there. However, mathematics might not always be equal to what we actually see. So for example, there is a really famous dilemma of the color orange, because white and orange is very hard to see. Black and orange can also be hard to see depending, of course, on the shade of orange. But in general, black and orange go a lot better together, even though sometimes a contrast plugin can say that the contrast is lower. So in the end, of course, the best way to go about designing is you can use the color contrast in general, but always check it and always check with multiple people to see what they can, what they find easy or difficult to read. And some colors also maybe stay away a little bit from it when, for example, creating text and things like that. Yeah, but indeed, right. So you cannot fully rely on a plugin all the time. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's no harm in testing in multiple places, even with real users.
Yeah.
The next question, I'm going to come over to Alejandra. You touched on it a little bit at the end of your presentation with some really great physical product designs. And the question really is, does accessible design limit artistic creativity? And what's your perspective on that? What's any guidelines for people who do find themselves thinking, oh, that text is too big, these colors aren't what my brand should be, that kind of thing?
Mm-hmm. No, I think accessibility in the beginning can be a little bit hard, the transition from designing inaccessible to accessible, but I would say that is the opposite. When you have more limitations, you get more creative. So, you know, if it's something for your grandma and if you don't like it, well, you are not the person who has to like it. It is the grandma. So you have to test it with the end user. And yeah, so I think that responds.
Okay, great, thank you. And Maaike, somebody was asking about the Ali accessible plugin and how they would get the information out of that to then show to hand off to their developers.
Yes, yeah, I also saw that question. Is it possible if I share my screen really quick? Because there's actually do that in the Figma file. So then we go shortly back to the slides I shared in Figma. So this was actually the slide we did the focus order plugin on. So here we used it. So of course there's now the small 1, 2, and 3 here, but actually what's also created, and sometimes you have to search for it because it's kind of distributed on the screen somewhere. There's a small panel created here. So we can just move that right next to the slide. And it states that the first element here, it's a rectangle, but the role is a text box. The second one is a checkbox, and the value is that it's actually checked. And the third one here is the button. So this is something that you can communicate to your to the developers of the team.
Great, thank you very much. I'd always advise people to add documentation alongside their components and styles within their design libraries anyway. And this is just an extra step to add that good practice and accessible design layer on top of your designs. Alejandra, I'm going to come back to you for the next question. What would your advice be to somebody who is just starting out with accessible design, aren't sure where to look, not sure what micro steps they can take to make their designs a bit more accessible?
Mm-hmm. Well, first I would say there's like a great book. It's called Mismatch. It's called How Inclusion Shapes Design by Kate Holmes. So you can start reading that. Also observing, for example, your parents, your grandma, and see how do they interact with these digital objects. So be more, observe more your environment and see what is not working, what is excluding people by design. And from there, even Facebook, for example, or other platforms, you can think like, kind of be more empathetic. So think like, okay, if I would be having really bad eyesight, would I be enjoying this platform or this content? So I think first you have to read and know what is like exclusion, inclusion, which is a whole other realm. And yeah, try to be more involved and this more empathetic approach. And about design, how to start with design. Well, it is a goal. You know, you have to make it your purpose, and you have to be very deliberate when you are doing these design decisions. So try to educate your team and why is it important that your product has to be accessible. And even now, from the legal side, there have been some people in the US, I think, that they have sued some companies that they don't have accessible websites. So even from that, you want to learn accessibility. So research, get informed, and start doing decisions.
That's really nicely led into my next question, which is coming over to Maaike. And I was going to ask whether there should be legal implications by standard if you're not designing accessible products. What's your perspective on that one?
Yeah, so I think actually that they are moving towards that implementing WCAG 2.1 will be, yeah, especially for governments and important business websites that everyone should be able to access. They are going to be soon required by law to implement at least level A and AA requirements in their designs. So we are moving into that direction. And I think for a lot of companies that will not be the law in a short future, so to say, but I believe that if we all move towards that, we really just accommodate for so many more users. We reach a wider audience, which is of course what all of our goals are, to have as many users use our designs and applications and products and have them be finding it very user-friendly. So I believe in the future, definitely there will be laws that will require us to implement accessible design in our products. But until then, I hope that we all move towards there and just make that transition so much more easier and also so much more logical because we're already there.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. The last question we've got, I'm going to come back to you, Alejandra, is regarding the touch points. So the touch areas when you're building buttons and icons and that sort of thing. What's your advice for elements like checkboxes and radio buttons? Because obviously they're typically very small and much smaller than our touch points. So how do we get around those problems?
Well, you know, make them bigger. Like maybe it will be like they hated like the client. Oh, can I have my logo bigger? But in this case, yeah, make the radio buttons bigger. If that will make it more accessible, and so yeah, your interface has to be more forgiving. So even if you are with a mouse or with a keyboard or with your finger, you will have to be able to tap on it easily. So if it's too small, then you have a small place for error. So the solution is make them bigger.
Yep, easy one. Actually, we just have one more come in, so I'm going to finish on this one and head back to Maaike. What's your advice for engaging in a more open and collaborative space with developers with regards to building accessible products? How do we encourage not only developers, but product managers, the wider team, to get on board with our goals and missions?
I think that's a great question. I actually studied computer science, so I specialized in user experience, but I came from a background of computer science. And in one of my courses, which was about e-health, where accessible design is, of course, a very important element, we actually were asked to create a user interface for elderly people as well. And they took us to the hospital and they had designed this suit that you could wear to make you kind of simulate some troubles that elderly people sometimes find that they have. So for example, it was, we had weights on our feet that made us a little bit unbalanced and we had to walk a little bit slower to keep the pace. We had certain glasses and that we had to put on to kind of see, okay, what would my vision be like in that age? And I noticed that for designers, but also for developers and also for people who were behind the idea and the concept of the project, it was an eye-opener. Because for once you kind of experience what it would be like to not be able to use the product as it was intended. And I think that can also be simulated with plugins, or ask your developers to not use their keyboard or not use their mouse. Take away the mouse for like half a day and see what happens. And in that way, kind of make people feel the pain, because when you feel the pain, that's when you really start to get motivated to do something about it.
Great. Well, a nice message to finish on. Everybody should be getting motivated, sharing collaboratively across the team, and ramping up that interest for accessible and ethical designs. Thank you both so much. As I said at the start, this will be on YouTube next week, so please make sure you check out that link as well. And thank you all for attending. We'll see you next time.
Thank you very much.